Some stories begin with dreams, others with tragedy. This one begins with silence, a hospital, a young girl who survived. She lost everything, and for a long time, she believed she would never be whole again. But from the ashes, something began to bloom. This is the story of Emma Callahan, a young woman who turned her deepest pain into purpose, who used her scars as bridges, who chose not just to survive, but to inspire. If you've ever thought about giving up, stay with US, because this story will show you that even the most excruciating pain can be the beginning of something extraordinary. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Emma Callahan had always been the kind of girl who made everything look easy. At 17, she was the pride of the small town of Cedarville, captain of the track team, top of her class, a volunteer at local shelters, and, according to her teachers, destined for great things. She had a bright smile, the kind that lit up school hallways, and an even bigger heart. She dreamed of studying literature in Boston, publishing a book, and seeing her parents clapping proudly at her graduation. Everything seemed to be on the right path. Until that night. It was autumn. Leaves danced across the damp asphalt, reflecting the soft yellow glow of the street lights. Emma was returning home from a late practice with her parents. In the car, the mood was light. They were planning a trip to visit college campuses. Her mother laughed while her father, off-key, tried to sing along to an old song on the radio. And then the light. A truck ran the intersection without stopping. The impact was devastating. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass was the last thing Emma heard. Before the world went dark. When she woke up, everything was silent. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and emptiness. There were tubes, machines, a throbbing pain throughout her body, and an even deeper ache in her chest. Her parents hadn't survived, but Emma lost more than just them that night. She lost part of her right leg. She lost her lightness. She lost her sense of self. The world she once knew was ripped away in seconds, and nothing that remained seemed to make sense. In the days that followed, as the anesthesia wore off, she discovered a new kind of pain, not the kind morphine could numb, but the one that lived in silence, in pitiful glances, in medical terms printed on paper, and in hushed voices saying, "She's strong. She'll get through this." But Emma didn't want to be strong. She wanted her parents back. She wanted to run again. She wanted the sound of laughter in the car. But it was all gone. All that remained was the cold hospital bed, the scars, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The first time she looked at her amputated leg, it felt like her entire body had betrayed her. She cried so much they had to sedate her. She was discharged days later, but there was no home to return to. Her childhood house had been sold. Emma was sent to live with her paternal aunt, Margaret, a cold, rigid woman more accustomed to organizing books by color than comforting a grieving niece. In the makeshift bedroom of her new home, Emma would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, silently asking the heavens if she would ever wake up from this nightmare. But the sky never answered, and so began a slow descent into a dark place where hope felt forbidden and the future just an empty word. What Emma didn't yet know was that from these ashes, something would one day bloom. But for now, all she could feel was the pain, and it was all she had left. The new house smelled of artificial lavender and furniture that looked perfect. Everything was in its place, picture frames precisely aligned, curtains always drawn, and a silence so absolute it almost hurt. Aunt Margaret was methodical, reserved, strict about routines, but utterly incapable of showing affection. She wasn't cruel, just indifferent. She treated Emma like a temporary guest, a living reminder of a tragedy she would rather pretend never happened. At their first dinner together, Margaret spoke about schedules, responsibilities, and the importance of maintaining order. Emma simply nodded. She felt no hunger, no thirst, no presence. It was as if she were watching her own life unfold from outside her body. The days that followed dragged on, as if time itself had lost its urgency. The physical pain began to give way to something deeper, the pain of absence. her parents' home, the sound of her mother in the kitchen, late-night conversations with her father about books, all of it was now memory. And memory hurt. At the new school, the stares were worse than words. There was too much silence where friendship used to be. No familiar faces, no laughter, just whispers in the hallway, curious glances poorly disguised, and an adapted chair in the back of the classroom. Emma spent her breaks in the bathroom, pretending to be on her phone, just to avoid being seen. At night, her room became both her refuge and her prison. The walls, despite being painted in soft, neutral tones, seemed to close in on her. The ticking of the clock marked every sleepless minute. Emma stopped replying to messages, blocked her old teammates, ignored emails from her former school. The world she once belonged to now felt like a foreign land, and she no longer held a passport to return. She began to wonder if she was still Emma Callahan, if there was anything left inside her worth holding onto. She stared into the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her eyes dim, her body altered, her soul fractured. The lowest point came on a grey morning. Rain poured outside. Emma sat on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile. She pulled out the old journal she had kept in her backpack since the accident. She opened to the first page, where years ago she had written, "My dreams are bigger than my fears." She read it as if it had been written by someone else, and she wept, silently, endlessly, as though she were bleeding from within. She felt guilty for being alive. How could she have survived while her parents had not? What kind of justice was that? For weeks, Emma drifted. She ate out of obligation, went through physical therapy mechanically, forced smiles to avoid questions. She was functioning but broken. Margaret, though aware of the emptiness in her niece's eyes, didn't know how to help. She defaulted to phrases like "this will pass" or "you need to be strong." But strength in that moment was nothing more than a hollow word. Then, in the midst of that darkness, a faint light began to emerge. A possibility, a person, a conversation that would change everything. But at that point in her story, Emma didn't know yet. She still believed her best days were behind her. She had no idea that the real beginning was still ahead. It was on an ordinary Thursday that Emma met Noah. The encounter wasn't planned. Nothing heroic, nothing romantic. Just another forced trip to a community physical therapy session, scheduled by her aunt as part of her mandatory routine. Emma went reluctantly, irritated, pushing her wheelchair down soulless hallways lined with beige walls and fake smiles. The room was full of people with stories she didn't want to hear. Elderly patients, soldiers, children, all marked by pain in one way or another. She hated being there. In the corner of the room, a man with a scruffy beard and a prosthetic leg was talking to a boy, maybe 12, who was trying to balance on a new prosthesis. The man laughed with him, told stories, used simple words. His voice was deep but gentle. He had a kind of charisma that filled the space. Everyone listened to him with quiet respect. Even the nurses. Noah Spencer, an Afghanistan war veteran. He lost his leg during an attack on the base where he served. Years later, he founded a small support group for people undergoing rehabilitation, offering more than just therapy. He offered presence, empathy, and humanity. Emma tried to go unnoticed, but Noah saw her, not out of pity but out of recognition. At the end of the session, he approached her. He sat in front of her, keeping a respectful distance, waiting for the right moment. When she finally looked up, he said, "You don't seem like you're here by choice." She only shrugged. "Neither was I," he added with a crooked smile. "But sometimes it's in the place we hate the most that we find what we truly need." Emma didn't respond, but something in that sentence kept echoing in her mind. The next week, she returned, sat in the same corner, observed. Noah didn't speak much, but when he did, it mattered. He used humor as a bridge but didn't hide his wounds. In one session, he showed the scar from his amputation and said, with disarming ease, "This is just flesh. What really needs healing is the soul." Emma wasn't used to people who spoke like that. No sugarcoating, no pretending. It disarmed her. Over time, she began staying after sessions, quiet, but present. Noah never pushed. Sometimes he shared stories from the war, other times about moments when he nearly gave up. He spoke of loss, but also of rediscovery, of how, in the middle of chaos, he learned to find meaning in serving others. One rainy afternoon, Emma spoke her first truly personal words since the accident. "I don't know who I am without sports. Without my parents, I feel like an empty shell." Noah took a deep breath. He met her gaze with quiet conviction. "You're still you, Emma. You're just trying to remember." That day, he invited her to join the therapeutic writing group he led on Saturdays, a small, intimate space where trauma survivors wrote letters that would never be sent, stories no one had to read, and memories that hurt a little less once put on paper. She hesitated, but accepted. And on that Saturday, facing a blank sheet of paper, Emma confronted the silence. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. But for the first time in months, the words came. "Dear Dad, dear Mom, I'm still here. But a part of me died with you, and even so, something inside me wants to go on. I just don't know how." When she finished, Emma cried, but not from despair. It was a cry of release, of someone pouring out their pain so it wouldn't drown them from the inside. Noah read her piece and said nothing. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Keep writing. That pain has a voice, and the world needs to hear it." The seed had been planted. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was no longer just darkness. It was strange how something as simple as a blank sheet of paper could be so terrifying and so liberating. Emma learned that on Saturday mornings, seated in the small room at the community center, alongside war veterans, accident survivors, and people who had lived through what the world insisted on calling tragedies, there, no one had to explain their pain. Words flowed in silence. Each piece read aloud was a fragment of a soul laid bare on the table. At first, Emma wrote letters to her parents, then childhood memories. Eventually, she began creating characters, fictional figures who bore the scars she still wasn't ready to face in herself. Noah was the first to notice. "You write from the soul," he said after reading a story about a girl who lived in a lighthouse and lit the beacon each night, in the hope that her parents' boat would return. And when someone writes like that, they're healing themselves and others. Emma smiled shyly. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but she kept writing every day. After school, before bed, during physical therapy breaks, she wrote in notebooks, on napkins, in phone apps, as if a spring inside her had awakened and refused to run dry. The writing group became her favorite part of the week. Her conversations with Noah grew deeper, and the reflection she saw in the mirror began to shift. The marks, the scars, the absence, they didn't disappear, but something new was taking root inside her, meaning. Little by little, Emma realized she didn't need to erase the past to move forward. She needed to reinterpret it. Then, during one of the group sessions, Noah announced a national short story contest on resilience, hosted by a writers' foundation. Anyone could participate. No theme restriction. Stories up to 3,000 words. Submission deadline 3 weeks. Emma doubted herself. She didn't think she was ready. But Noah, with his usual calmness, said, "Don't think about winning. Think about releasing. Write what you can't say out loud." That night, Emma sat at her desk for hours, staring at her laptop screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The words came in waves, fragmented, messy, intense. But they came. The story she wrote wasn't about accidents, death, or amputations. It was about a girl who collected stones from the riverbed. Each stone represented a pain. And the more stones she carried, the more she sank. Until one day, she decided to build with those very stones a bridge to the other side of the river. When she finished, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. She submitted the story on the final day. The following weeks were a whirlwind of doubt and hope. But one thing was certain: regardless of the outcome, Emma had discovered something priceless. Pain didn't have to be a burden. It could be raw material. She began sharing excerpts with the group. Margaret, who had kept her emotional distance, began to notice a change in her niece. Though she couldn't quite put it into words, she saw that the broken girl who had arrived at her doorstep was slowly rebuilding something invisible, a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Then, on a sunny afternoon as Emma was leaving school, she received an email. Her story had been selected as a finalist among more than 5,000 submissions. She was invited to present her piece at an event in New York City. Noah read the email with her and smiled like a proud father. "You didn't just write, Emma. You survived, and now you're inspiring others." Emma could hardly believe it. For the first time since the accident, her heart was beating for something other than fear. She was learning to dream again, but the road to healing is never a straight line. And before she could celebrate, the past came knocking more cruel than ever. In the days following the announcement of the contest finalists, Emma felt as if she were living in a dream. For the first time, the messages on her phone weren't condolences or medical reminders. They were congratulations, invitations, words of encouragement. Even some teachers at her new school, once indifferent, now approached her with a different look, not pity, but admiration. The event in New York was set for the following month. Finalists would have 5 minutes to present their stories to an audience of writers, editors, and invited guests. It was a rare, perhaps once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Noah was convinced this was only the beginning. Emma, though still nervous, was starting to believe it too. She practiced every day, rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, trained her breathing, worked with Noah on techniques to manage anxiety. For the first time since the accident, she looked toward the future with excitement. And then the blow came. On an otherwise ordinary morning, Emma arrived at school and immediately noticed the stares. Not the usual curious or awkward glances, but ones filled with restrained laughter, malicious whispers, and expressions laced with cruelty. In the hallway, someone dropped a sheet of paper in her path. Emma bent down to pick it up. It was a printed photo. Her photo. An image of her in the hospital, still unconscious, surrounded by tubes and machines, her body partially exposed, revealing the amputation. In the corner of the page, someone had scrawled in red marker, "This is the hero who's going to represent our school." The floor fell out from under her. Online, the damage had already been done. An anonymous profile had posted the photo, accompanied by cruel comments, jokes about her appearance, and ridicule directed at her story. The post was quickly going viral among the students. Emma locked herself in the bathroom and cried. 4 hours. The shame was unbearable. She felt violated, humiliated, betrayed. When she got home, she went straight to her room and deleted the event confirmation email. She turned off her phone, ignored every message from Noah. For days, she didn't leave her bed. She refused food, refused company, and for the first time in a long while, she thought about giving up again. Noah, concerned, came to her house. Margaret, at a loss for what to do, let him in. He sat beside her bed in silence and waited. When Emma finally turned her face toward him, Noah spoke, his voice calm but steady. "I saw the post, and I also saw the dozens of messages of support that followed. I saw the people in our group outraged, ready to defend you. I saw your strength even now. But what you're not seeing, Emma, is that they're not laughing at you. They're afraid of what you represent." Emma's eyes were glassy with confusion. "You represent someone who took their pain and made something beautiful out of it. That scares people who've never had the courage to face their own wounds. They want you to shrink, to go back into silence. But you already left that place." She started crying again, but this time, it was different. It was the cry of someone hearing the truth they needed most. That night, Emma opened her laptop, reread her story. Then, she began writing something new, a second piece, an open letter. Not just to the person who shared the image, but to anyone who had ever felt exposed, ashamed of their scars, My scars are not flaws, they are medals. Each one tells a story of survival. You may laugh, but I'm still here. And if that bothers you, maybe it's because you're still trapped in a place I refuse to stay." She printed the letter and read it aloud at the writing group the following week. When she finished, the group gave her a standing ovation. The week after that, Emma Ray sent her event confirmation email, not as the victim of a scandal, but as a woman who had walked through hell and come back with words that could change lives. The pain was still there, but now it had purpose. The train station was crowded, noisy, filled with voices crossing paths, indifferent to one another's stories. But for Emma, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. Every step toward the platform was weighted with memories, hesitations, and hard-won victories. Beside her, Noah carried the bag with the notes and laptop. He didn't need to say a word. He was there, and that was enough. New York was a world of its own, loud, vibrant, impossible to ignore. When they arrived at the event venue, Emma's stomach twisted with nerves. The finalists were gathered in an elegant hall filled with well-dressed people, professional smiles, and carefully measured gazes. She felt out of place until a young writer approached her and said, "You're Emma Callahan, right? The one who wrote the story about the stones. I cried when I read it. You have a gift." Emma smiled, surprised, and for the first time that day, she felt like maybe she belonged there. Hours later, sitting backstage in the auditorium with her registration card in hand, she heard the host call her name over the microphone. Our next finalist, Emma Callahan. With the story "The Bridge Over the Silent River," the lights dimmed. A single spotlight lit the stage. Emma walked forward slowly. The prosthetic leg made a soft sound with each step. The room was utterly silent, all eyes on her, every possible judgment waiting. But in that moment, Emma didn't see the crowd. She saw her parents, sitting in the front row. She saw the dark room where she had once cried. She saw Noah at the writing group. She saw the girl in the lighthouse, and she understood. It was time to speak. Emma took a deep breath, opened her laptop, but before reading her story, she looked out at the audience and said, "I prepared something to read tonight, but first, I need to say something real, something I never thought I'd have the courage to say in front of so many people." There was a quiet stir in the crowd. She continued, "Months ago, I lost my parents in an accident. I also lost part of my body, but what hurt most was losing who I was. I became someone who cried in secret, who hid even from herself. And when I finally found the courage to be seen, someone exposed me again, tried to shame me into silence. But that's when I realized my story isn't something I should hide. It's something that can heal." The room grew even quieter. Every eye fixed on her. "My story is about carrying stones. But tonight, I want you to know those stones, those scars, they can build bridges. And if anyone here feels like they're drowning, know this: there's another side of the river. I am standing here to prove it." She then read her story. Her voice, once hesitant, was now steady. Each word cut through the silence like thread stitching something back together. In those who listened, when she finished, the audience didn't clap right away, because they were feeling. Then a single applause rang out, then another, and another, until the entire room rose to their feet in unison, not just applauding the story, but the courage behind it. Emma cried, but for the first time, not from pain, from liberation. By the end of the event, she was not only awarded first place in the contest, she was approached by 3 publishers for future meetings and invited to speak at schools about writing and overcoming trauma. Backstage, Noah hugged her tightly. "You didn't just read a story, Emma. You lit a lighthouse." On the train ride home, she stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. But inside, everything was still, at peace, as if a forgotten part of her had finally returned to where it belonged. The girl who once carried stones had built her bridge. And now she was ready to cross it, carrying many others with her. Years had passed. New York was now part of the past, just like the cold hallways of her old school, the community center, and even Aunt Margaret's meticulously organized house. Over time, Margaret had become a warmer presence in Emma's life. Not a mother, but someone who, in her own way, had learned how to love again. Emma was now 20-5. Her once tightly bound hair now flowed freely over her shoulders. Her clothes were comfortable, authentic. The dullness in her eyes had been replaced by the depth of someone who had lived through what most wouldn't dare to face. There was serenity and strength. Her first book, Letters I Never Sent, became a bestseller among young adults. It was a collection of fictional, though not entirely fictional, letters from characters grappling with loss, trauma, and rebirth. The book was adopted by schools and universities, discussed in book clubs, and quoted in mental health seminars. And Emma didn't stop there. She founded a project called Write Yourself Back, offering free therapeutic writing workshops for young people who had endured trauma, grief, abuse, abandonment, bullying, depression. In every session, she repeated the words Noah had once spoken to her: "Your pain has a voice, and the world needs to hear it." Double quotes. Noah, now with graying hair and a cane, was still a constant in her life. More than a mentor, he was family. He attended events, read the students' stories with care, and always said, "There's no magic cure, but there is a path." One spring morning, Emma got into a rented car and drove to a cemetery in the small town of Cedarville. She carried a simple bouquet of white lilies and a worn-out notebook with a frayed cover. When she arrived, she walked to the grave where her parents' names were engraved side by side. She stood in silence for a while. The breeze was soft and the sky was clear. She sat down on the grass, crossed her legs, and opened the notebook. It was the same journal in which she had written her first letter after the accident. Years ago. She took a deep breath and read aloud, "Dear Dad, dear Mom, I'm still here. And now I finally know why." The tears came, but not from pain. They came from longing, gratitude, and peace. Beside her, Noah slowly sat down, wincing slightly. He looked up at the sky and said, "You know what I see when I look at you, Emma?" She smiled. "What? A living bridge. You didn't just cross it. You became the way for others to follow." Emma pulled out her phone and opened a recent email, an invitation from Boston University to join as a resident speaker in their literature and therapeutic expression program. She showed the email to Noah, but before she could say a word, he was already smiling. "Go. Teach the next ones how not to stay silent." The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Emma stood up, brushed off her jeans, looked down at the flowers on the grave and said, "I'm not who I was, but I am whole. And now it's time to keep going." They returned to the car. The radio played a gentle song. Noah fell asleep in the passenger seat, and Emma drove in silence, feeling the world move just as it should. Because sometimes what feels like the end is simply the darkest chapter before the rebirth. And when you choose to turn pain into purpose, life doesn't just go on, it blooms. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments, what pain in your life would you like to transform into strength? Share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. And make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep receiving stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that there's always a new beginning, even when everything seems lost.